And with that, I would like to introduce Tom Archer. And Tom, he's our primary speaker for tonight. He's the RPA practice lead for Sageti, covering the Kansas City, Missouri area. Tom has more than 20 years of business and IT experience and is a certified RPA associate. He's got extensive experience in RPA with more than 50 certifications covering development, testing, implementation, and government. And helping him tonight is one of Sageti's clients, Balkisa Mahamane. And Balkisa is manager of automation for NEI Global Relocation in Omaha. She's got more than 9 years of experience working with both internal and external teams to implement solutions that improve workplace processes. I also wanted to give a shout out to Trent Cooley. He got Tom and Balkisa and I and Dina together to plan this particular session. And Trent is the enterprise sales consultant for Sageti here in Omaha. So with that, I'll hand it over to Gina and Tom.
And I will share my screen, and hold on.
And while I'm going to go ahead and get the announcement shared out there in the file. So if you guys would like that information, you will have access to that. You can download that file while he's getting set up there.
Hopefully you guys can see.
While Tom is getting set up, I was just curious, are there any other organizations here using RPA already?
I think that's our first poll question, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh.
So do we want to run that right now, since the question has been asked?
No, that's all right. You can just stick with that.
Okay.
We'll hit it.
Okay, good. So this is kind of what I'll be covering this evening. What is RPA? What won't it do? Who is RPA? I have a couple points in the presentation. We'll take questions. So if you save your questions for those periods, that'd be great. We'll touch on process selection and the robot types that are involved with RPA. And then I'll kind of go a little bit deeper into actual implementation of RPA and what it takes to kind of do it right. We'll talk about the future. And then at the end, we'll give a kind of a live demo of kind of a process overview that we're kind of currently working on at NEI. So with that, what is RPA? And so RPA stands for Robotic Process Automation. It's technology that allows you to kind of interact with any application to do what a person does. And so by interacting with the systems that your normal users are using, you get the benefits of all the business rules and all the business logic that is built into all those automation or into all those applications, and a robot just does it automatically. And so they're using the same screens, they're using the same logins, they're using all of those things. You configure the robots, with their own systems and their own applications. What can they do? I've struggled to what can't they do. They can do just about a little bit of everything. Capturing data, running applications, responses, taking decisions on predefined rules, communicating with other systems, and it primarily targets those processes that are highly manual, repetitive, rule-based, those clear processes that, to a normal person might be considered boring. Those are the type of processes that are great for RPA. So when I talk about RPA, just to kind of set the terminology here, you'll hear it a lot of bots. The bot is doing this, the bot is doing that. That is the robot. So that is the software that is completing the business work. And so it's either configured to run with a user or independently. And we'll touch on those robot types here in a little bit. What does the robot do? The robot completes a process. And so you build the processes that the robot will complete. A robot can do multiple different types of processes, much like a person. You don't do the same process at your work every single day, every single minute. No, you do this, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this. It's the same for a robot. The robots can be scheduled to run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This is why your CFO loves it, because, oh, well, I can just have that robot running it all the time. I've been working in RPA for a while. I have yet to see a robot run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, just because that is so many processes that a robot would be running. And what if the robot stops working at 3 a.m.? Who's going to help? If something like that occurs, it does happen. And so when we talk about building a bot, that is getting a robot configured to do work, and actually building a process is giving that robot work to do. And so again, one robot can do hundreds, thousands of different processes as long as you get them all built. So that is kind of some terminology from an RPA perspective. What won't RPA do? Again, I have found that RPA can do just about everything if you get your mind to it and figure out what. But it won't learn new tricks. And so if something changes in your process, unless you tell the robot that it needs to do this instead, you need to change your process. And this is talking like a screen change. Oh, suddenly that button that was on the left has been moved to the lower left, and those sort of things. A lot of the RPA technology has gotten a little bit more hardy, but there's still, if there's changes to a process, you kind of have to keep up with it. So monitoring and kind of maintaining the process is a key part, because as much as we'd love for these processes to work 100% of the time, every time, you're dealing with data, and there could be funky data, and suddenly a robot gets some funky data, doesn't know what to do with it. A random pop-up will appear. Okay, what do I do with that? That sort of thing. It doesn't replace standard IT development. It is a tool in the toolkit, but it's not the only tool in the toolkit. If a process can be improved with longer IT development, APIs or improved screens or those sort of things, integrations, that should be pursued, but RPA can get something done much quicker. If you talk to your IT department and they say, yeah, we can get to that in about 2 years, RPA could maybe get to that 3 to 6 months. And so suddenly you're getting benefits 3 to 6 months versus 2 years down the line. And then the other part is, it's not going to fix a broken or inefficient process. And so one thing about RPA is it really kind of shows your issues with a process. You'll think you'll have your process really understanding, and you'll understand all your process, and then you get involved with it from an RPA perspective, and you really get a deeper understanding of your process. And so why does this button always do this? What if it did this? And those sort of can seem like almost remedial things that are just very deep in the level. So that's kind of a key. So that's
hey,
kind
Tom,
of what, yeah.
Tom, would you mind clicking hide on that pop-up that's there at the bottom?
Oh, maybe if I can click hide. Thank
There
you.
we go.
Sorry.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Next, what won't RPA do? It won't replace employees. Again, your CFO may have dreams of a robot replacing 2 or 3 or 17 people. That typically is not the case. I'm not going to take your job. I'm going to take the boring parts of your job. And if I take the boring parts of your job, the 20-40% that is the boring parts of your job, suddenly you have other things that you could be doing with that big brain of yours. Process improvement, dealing with exceptions, and dealing with more technical details that a robot is not going to be able to automate. It takes the boring part. It allows for more mentally involved and creative activities. Like suddenly it's like, oh, you have the process improvement ideas. They've done studies, and it leads obviously to increased efficiency for people, but it also leads to better insights into your customers.
Bringing me a drink?
If that item, suddenly, if you're not dealing with going through thousands of emails on a basis, and suddenly you're able to do more and better things. And so one other thing, and it's kind of a softer benefit. One of the main benefits is time given back to the business from an RPA perspective. Like if you do an automation, suddenly the business has more time to do different things. If you went to your boss to say, hey, I have time to do stuff, they're going to have something for you. And that's kind of one of the big benefits of RPA. But it leads to happier employees. you know, it allows for more human interactions and kind of better sort of work to be done. So that's what Wont RPA do. And it tends to be when you're working with a company and working with an organization and you say, okay, we want to get RPA involved, this is the first thing that comes to people's mind. Oh, you're going to take my job? No, I'm not going to take your job. And so you really need to lead with this. And, you know, when we were talking about this deck earlier, this is kind of an important point is don't worry about it. It's not going to take your job, and you just need to, it'll free you up to do stuff. And once you get involved with it, it's like, oh yeah, this is awesome. It's taking that boring stuff. I still have more time to do stuff. So who is RPA? So again, if you say you know RPA and you talk to someone else and they say they know RPA, there's over 50 different RPA vendors. They each have their own language, their setup. They're all different applications. There's some similarities, but they're all different and unique. And so the picture over here on the right side is Forrester, who does kind of application rating and reviewing. This is the top 14 providers that matter most. You want to be in the upper right-hand corner. So if those are the leaders, and then, you know, again, this is just the 14. This isn't even 50. There's some on here I didn't even know. But a lot of companies have gotten into this market just because, you know, the global market is currently 1.5 billion, and they're talking it's going to be 13 billion by 2028. That's strangely not very far from now, and that's what, 7-8 times bigger. So this is a growing, expanding market. And it's just getting bigger as more and more companies get into this and figure out, oh, I could do this, I could do that, I could do that. Market leaders, I want to call out a few here. Blue Prism, I think actually might be the first true RPA company. They started in 2001 in UK. They're still around. They've kind of slowed down a little bit. Automation Anywhere is another big one. They started in 2010 out of California. And then the two big ones, I think, from a market perspective is UiPath, which was actually founded in Romania in 2005. Their founder is actually still the CEO. And if you ever see any videos with him and, or anything out there, he sounds like 40% like Dracula. It's a very deep, rich Romanian accent. And so, he started the company and he's still around. And so they've kind of, as you see from this picture, they're definitely considered a leader. And then the other one is Microsoft. They joined this market mid last year. They bought a company called Softmotive, and immediately kind of rebranded it as Microsoft Power Automate, which is part of their Microsoft Power platform, which if you've been in corporate America is around. And so that's their play into RPA right now. And again, there's a ton of companies out there doing RPA. And so when you say you know RPA, you don't know all of them. So with that, we'll take a break for questions. And is this our poll question?
I believe so. We'll start with poll number 1, which is, what is your familiarity with RPA? So I'll give folks just a few seconds to answer that. It's pretty brief.
And then go ahead.
So when I see that the responses are slowing down, I'll give you a 5-second warning and I'll close it out. But if you have any questions, feel free to throw them into the chat as well. I'll make sure to bring them to Tom's attention. Looks like the answers are slowing down. So I'm going to go with 3, 2, 1, end of polling and sharing the results. So it looks like, Tom, you've got an audience that is really wanting to learn.
They're good, very good. There's a few. I will say UiPath is kind of the market leader, and it wasn't that long ago they had like 500 customers. So it's something that is pretty new, just in the overall in the world, if you will. Any questions so far on what has been covered? All right, we'll party on. So next up is, what is RPA from a robot and process selection? What are the types of robots? There are two main types of robots, attended and unattended, and then we'll talk about what kind of processes can be automated with RPA. First up is the unattended. The analogy I have for this, and I think it works pretty well, is it's an intern. And so if you think of an RPA unattended robot as an intern, everything kind of falls into place. It's configured like a new user, so it's going to have its own credentials. It's going to have its own machine in your systems. And it's going to have whatever access is needed to complete the process. But it's, think of it as like an intern. That intern is going to be doing something off to the side. And so you're not going to have interaction with it. It's going to complete the work. And, depending on if you tell it to, okay, when it's done, let me know or not, that work's going to completely off to the side, which is why your CFO loves these, because, it's completely taking somebody out of the loop. That robot will just do all that work itself. It can obviously work 24/7, so don't try that with your summer interns, but it can work whenever, as long as the systems and data are available, and that usually tends to be the issue. For most of my clients, I recommend, run it during business hours, because again, you could have the intern come in 11 to 7, but if the intern runs into any questions, who's it going to ask, or what are going to be the issues that pop up? These robots, if there's a failure, that robot's going to sit there and not do anything until the question is answered, and things like that. And so that's the unattended robots, the intern. Next up is the attended robots. The analogy here is R2-D2. So you got Luke Skywalker flying through the sky, and R2-D2 is his co-pilot, and the engine comes afire. And so what does Luke say? Luke could probably put out the fire himself, but he says, R2, put out that fire. And so it kind of serves as a co-pilot. From a configuration perspective, they are configured with the person, and it's a case where that person can request the attended robot to do something, on demand. And the benefits here are, obviously it's an on-demand process. So there's a menu, depending on what vendor you have. There's a menu of your current processes that you could have pick. So the robot, you click the start the process, and the robot does the process much quicker than you do. Obviously your speed's better, your errors go down, because the robot is going to click exactly the right things and take the right data, and so on and so forth. The other benefit here is you can also get information from a user. And so if you're doing an attended process, you can build into, okay, a pop-up box will pop up and answer the question, and based on the answer, the robot will do whatever's necessary. And so that's the benefit here. The downside, for most vendors, you're waiting for the robot to complete the work. You can't be doing something at the same time, because this robot is going to take over your screen and your computer for a brief second or two. And so that's the benefit of the attended robots, is it's on demand, it's speed. It's really good for those call center customer interaction scenarios. I've worked at places where they talked about, it takes us 6 months before we can have somebody get on the phone. Well, if you had a bunch of attended processes, maybe you could speed up that training and shorten your training, and people don't have to understand the 17 screens that you're going through. If you build a process that says, change address, you change address process, boom, 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 the robot is going through those screens for you. And so that's the attended robots. These tend to not be as focused, because again, your CFO wants to just do everything unattended, but there's a lot of value to be in attended processes, especially for your call center and those sort of people. So those are the two main robot types. Process selection, highly structured and repeatable processes are best. In the past, I've made a joke about Spaceballs. You're combing the desert. A robot's going to comb the desert. It's going to do exactly what you tell it to do, but it's not going to do anything else. And so if there's a random pop-up that comes up sometimes, you have to plan for, okay, if the robot sees that pop up, what do I do? Do I hit okay? If a robot has to know exactly what it's looking for. From a business logic perspective, most of your processes turn into a decision tree. If yes, do this. If no, do this. It turns into a math equation. Okay, when do I pick yes? When do I pick no? When do I hit this button? When do I hit this button? And those sort of things. Decision points need to be clearly defined. And as I'm kind of talking through, I think you can kind of see that requirements need to be really well defined too, just because there's a lot of points in this, and you have to get very granular. Going back to combing the desert, do I hit yes? Do I hit no? Do I hit tab or do I hit enter? Again, the robot's going to do exactly what you tell it to do, but it's not going to do anything else. So again, from a processes, and it kind of goes back to my intern analogy. If an intern joined your company tomorrow, what would you give them? An intern's not going to know your business. It's not going to know the business rules and logic that you may know, but it can go out and grab a file from a shared drive, or grab a file from a website, or do those sort of things, do some basic manipulations. When you're getting started, really think about, a minimal viable product of, okay, what can I deliver to the business that is the quickest possible thing? And it could be a simple thing. Again, when I'm working with clients, it's, okay, what's the easiest job that you do? This isn't hard, but it just takes time. And if I take that time away from you and give you back that time, suddenly you have more time to do other stuff. And so, that's kind of where you start, is just start small and kind of build your way up from there. Like I said, this basic criterion, I'll go into this in more detail, is, rule-based. Process is not likely to change. Again, if the systems are going to change, or, oh, we're getting a new system in October, I probably don't want to build a process if you're going to get a new system, just because I have to then build through the steps of the new system. Single sign-on, the robot is going to sign in just like a normal person. And so that takes, okay, enter username, enter password, hit okay. Like, each of those are steps. And so the more processes, the more systems you're logging into, the better. And then no handoffs among participants. Again, especially when you're looking at an unattended process, you want something that a robot could complete from A to B and get all the way through. Actually, probably go A to Z. So you want to be able to complete the entire process offline is the benefit. So again, on the criteria, again, from the rule-based analysis, if it's 1, do this. If it's 2, what if it's 3? Business data can be messy at times. And so you kind of have to think of all those scenarios from a rule-based analysis that, okay, what if it sees something it doesn't see at all? Maybe I send that to a person instead. The robots can have email. They can send emails to people. Highly repetitive, actually, that's obviously a key. You're building a process. You want to run that process as many times as possible, because, again, that's where you get your value. No handoffs through your applications. Your single sign-on. Obviously, it's so much easier if I just hit, I go to a web app or something like that, and it's already open. Logging in, it's going to take steps. That's going to take credentials. How do I handle that? Those sort of things. And again, stable applications, occasionally the pop-up will appear out of nowhere that just says this, and we just hit okay. Well, okay, one, I would say from a process perspective, we should work to remove that, because, again, something as easy as just a pop-up, a human would know, oh, okay, I see that, just do that. But if it just pops up at random times, the robot may not, okay, if it's not looking for it, it's not going to know what to do. And so stable applications not likely to break is always something you kind of want to shoot for. What can be automated? This slide kind of talks about all the other things. Obviously, operations is key. So, obviously, when you get into a company, what are the high volume transactions and activities that are done? What am I doing 1,000 times a month or 1,000 times a day? Those sort of activities are the key ones to really think about automating first. And then, again, we find is operations wants to do RPA, and then other organizations want to get involved. And HR is a good example. If you've worked in HR, you may have gotten Workday a few years ago or something like that. But any other automations, you just don't get, just because it's from a priority perspective. And I've been at companies where one person does all of HR. All the payroll is handled by one person. That's a really important person. We need to help that person and take work off her plate. And something like a data entry, we have to take data from one system and put it in another. That's the sort of thing that's perfect for automating. Finance, that's another good area for automation. The guys in charge of the dollars and cents, for some reason, have a really good grasp on their processes, and they're very clearly defined. So that's a good one. Obviously supply chain kind of ties into all of that operations stuff, customers calling in, requesting documentation, requesting this, doing plan changes, doing those sort of things. And then, and this is kind of an area that hasn't been scraped a lot, but I think it's an area that will be coming in the future, is IT. So much of IT is just entering data, entering tickets, working tickets, and those sort of things. I've seen companies that have let the robots close tickets. If it's a standard operating ticket, okay, we can build a process that the robot will recognize what that ticket is and close the system and close the ticket automatically. Those sort of things. Again, it's the boring part of your job that just sucks. Oh, I just have another one of these tickets to close. Well, you could build an automation for that, and that would be kind of a quicker thing as well. So with that's kind of an overarching thinking on what kind of processes. We'll take a pause for questions here. Do we have a poll question here? I forgot where we put the polls.
We do.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
What makes RPA distinctive in the market is they're part of.
So if your company is currently working with RPA, what software are they using? And I think we'll have fairly limited answers to this because, well, everyone can answer. There's an option for everybody, but not too many people are using it.
Yeah. And
I have a question for Balkisa. And I wondered if, Balkisa, when you had chosen any processes for the many that you've done, were there any that you started out with and then you got into it and said, this isn't going to work, and had to scrap it? Basically not one that went well?
That hasn't happened, because before getting into the process, there was a lot of work that is involved. I would say the prerequisite, honestly, is process documentation. It sounds cheesy, but your processes do have to be documented. And if you have a structured process documentation program, it is easy to see those processes that are good candidates for RPA and see those that need to be worked on. Because you don't want to take processes as is and then automate that. You don't want to automate broad processes. Sometimes the pain, it's because the process is simply broken, right? It doesn't work. So sometimes you make those changes and realize that you don't even need RPA. And sometimes you make those changes to structure the data, to organize the process, establish a flow to it, and now it becomes a good candidate for RPA. Then you go into automating it. There will be some points though where you will be challenged with the features available. Currently a process that we're working on where we have to move files to email files to public folders in Outlook. That gave us a bit of a challenge, but we had to make some changes within our Outlook public folder settings, and then we enabled the robot to use emails. We were able to overcome that. So that was one where, I would say, yeah, maybe we would have had to scratch that, but so far there hasn't been one. We were always able to find workarounds. And using RPA doesn't mean that you're purely using RPA all the time, right? Sometimes you do have to patch with traditional automation scripting to kind of, get there. You do what you have to do. There's always a solution, I say.
Yeah, and it does help to have some flexibility in your process, okay, because RPA people are going to come in and say, okay, why do you do it that way? And so to have the flexibility to change your process is beneficial. And then, I think I've seen the numbers that like 30%, 40% of RPA initial activities, they decide to scrap it because, like Balkisa said, you have to really get in there and do the analysis on your process. And once you kind of dig in there, it's like, oh, this isn't going to work at all. And so that's okay. It's okay if don't try to fit the square peg in the round hole, for sure. Any other questions?
I love Balkisa that you said it's really about having that process documented. And even if you aren't looking towards automation, that's just a really foundational piece of information. And whether you're going to automate it or not, I think, Tom, to your point, you want to be flexible on what makes the most sense. I am going to go ahead and close the poll so we can do that and share the results.
All right. Thank you.
Could I also ask a question?
Sure.
Of course.
Tom, so do you do any sort of process or, I guess, candidate or RPA opportunity assessment based on complexity and feasibility before you do a high-level look at the process to see certain questions determining if I'm really going to get a cost savings out of this before going any further?
Yeah, absolutely. And, obviously you start with volume. Like, how many times am I doing this process? If this is a process you're doing once a year, I'm probably not going to want to automate that. But if it takes you 5 or 10 minutes every day, that's kind of one of the things. And so obviously if okay, how many times is this process going to be run in a year is a good place to start. And then you kind of look at the complexity. If the process is going into 7 or 10 different applications, I don't know, maybe that's something we shouldn't do. And maybe we should work on improving this process or breaking it into smaller pieces. Maybe I can automate a piece or two of a process. And again, that gives you time. And that kind of, like I talked about, from a minimal viable product, do those sort of things. But yeah, it's, you need to kind of look at it from a scoring perspective, and a lot of the vendors have their own applications or items that you can put in information, and it'll give you a score of like, oh, this is something that could be automated. And so there are ways to figure out if it's the right thing to automate.
I got a couple of questions.
Sure.
Go ahead, Bruce.
I'm sorry, I'm a techie. At Mutual, we have used Jeb and to do automated testing of our web applications, and that's becoming a big effort. One of the things that Jeb does, and Groovy, within Social Groovy and the other tools we have, is allows us to not have to stick to exact addresses on the screen. Now, I assume these packages also talk, or will deal with mainframes and regular PC applications. Those based on the point of position of the screen, and is not extracting any data or scraping the data and trying to convert it in general, or what's it doing in general?
Yeah, you can play with mainframes with this. It's one of those things where tab is your friend. And so, if a robot can read a screen, and okay, if I have to go down to the third spot, it's easier just to hit tab, and I get down to the right spot. Hotkeys are a friend of RPA, and there's so many, like all of the Microsoft items have hotkeys that you don't even realize. I think if you hit Control P, it'll go to print. That's easier than hitting go to File, go to Print. So it's those sort of things that can work with from a mainframe. With mainframes, the issue kind of tends to be at times data. Is that okay? Which data piece do I want to do? And so that can be an issue. But
so a lot of this is basically just reading the landscape and saying, okay, there's a tree, there's this, there's that. I don't have to go up to it and I'm blind and feel that it's a tree like you can in Groovy. And it just says that is a tree, and so that's assume it. So basically, you might have some of these applications, I imagine, would have logs when they have a potential error, and they can go back and look. So it depends upon, I guess, the flavor of the tool you're using, how much you can really automate, and how many safety features you can, like what we do when we browse web pages.
Yeah, and it does the same thing. So that's what I talked about from mainframe. It can do tab, but it can also, hey, look for this picture. And if you see this picture, there's the button over here to the right.
Right.
Kind of an anchor of like, okay, if the robot recognizes that right here is a thing, beside it is going to be the button I need to hit. And so you can do both with RPA. So.
And do these generally run on Linux or on a powerful PC workstation?
They all have different requirements for the size of the PC, but it's not unlike your or mine PCs.
Right.
You can run it on a server. You can run it, depending on your flavor of Windows, so on and so forth. And yeah, they all have documentation on the requirements needed to run, but it can run on just about anything.
Right.
So Bruce, for us, we are running the unattended robots on virtual servers, and that frees up the computers. Like Tom mentioned earlier, the robot will be taking over your screen and you can't do anything. It takes over control of your mouse. Right. So by having it on the server, we don't have to worry about it. And when we develop, sometimes we have to test to avoid crippling our screen. We do it off of Citrix, and it's limited to that window, right, that we have on one screen. Regarding the positioning of the robot activities on the screen, it's funny you asked that question because last week I had an issue with one automation that I was testing. I used the Anchor feature that Tom mentioned to tell the robot where to type the text within our ticketing support system. And when I developed the automation, I developed it on my larger screen. But last time when I was running it, I was running it on my laptop. So the first word that says set welcome packet for this policy, the first word set was not being written within the text box because on my laptop, when it finds that localization, it is off compared to where it would have been on the larger screen. So I was
we've had that same problem in many ways of programming. Jeb and dealing with that, and basically we don't use we just use phrases that it looks for within the HTTP or whatever else it's using.
Yeah, and that's again, you got to be specific with these guys. So absolutely.
Valkisa, you also bring up the importance on if you're using that location, the importance of testing on different sizes of screens or all the different components that might be in use today or come in use in the future. Yeah. So I don't know, Tom, if there's anything else you want with these results of where people are using. It looks like there's most are not using it yet. 5 are using UiPath, 1 is Automation Anywhere, and 4 are Blue Prism or Microsoft. There was one other question on the chat line from Amanda. Are there any online or in-person professional development communities for RPA? Where are people talking about this?
Yeah, and so every company has their own website and academy. I will say, since it sounds like UiPath is really kind of the market leader, UiPath has a free online academy that probably has, 100 different courses out there. There's learning paths that you can go through and get free certifications that you could hang on your cube if you're in your cube after COVID. And so you can go through that online training and it's free. A lot of them offer free software you can download on a trial basis to try it out. And so that there's certainly ways to do it. Microsoft has some training out there. So pick your favorite vendor, go out there and Google just free training and pick your choice and you'll more than likely find it.
May I add a comment?
Sure.
The mention was virtual servers. Mutual has it so we can spin up our own servers and our own workstations, and that makes automation so much faster because you can just throw it away and crash it and create another one. And it's just really nice compared to having to work on physical workstations. Yeah, and virtual is the way to go. And all of these companies, they play well with the cloud. And so if you're playing in the cloud, they're going to play in the cloud just fine with you. And integration and all of that. So I think Automation Anywhere specifically has an agreement with like Google Cloud, but they all can play with whatever sandbox you're in. So real quick, I'll just kind of touch on how to implement this stuff. I came up with kind of an analogy of it's kind of like building a house.
these are the items you're going to need to be successful. First up is, executive support. When a family is building a house, does one person make that decision by themselves? No, it usually is a family involved. And kind of RPA is the same way. If you have centralized executive support on this, because it is going to take some time to show benefits, but it is going to take some time. Any other development isn't going to show benefits day one. But if RPA wants to be brought in by operations, and I've seen this way too much. Okay, what if another group wants to get involved? Okay, suddenly I'm taking operations resources to help finance. So it helps to centralize. And again, as much as we'd love to do this without IT, you're going to need their help. So make sure IT's at the table as soon as possible. Because again, everybody's going to be involved here. And so if the more centralized you can have that executive support, the better. And same thing with standards. A lot of these vendors say, okay, citizen developers, where somebody in HR is building their own processes, somebody in finance is building their own processes, so on and so forth. But you need that centralized group to say, here's the right way to do this. Here's the right way to make it secure from a data perspective and logins and credentials. All the machines should look like this, those sort of things. And so within RPA, it's called a Center of Excellence, a COE. That is kind of the group that is the hub of RPA development. And, if nothing else, they're going to be the experts on RPA. And so you need in the company, if I run into a problem, who can I go to help? Google is your friend with a lot of RPA stuff, but it helps to have that person inside the company to go with. Data is the foundation. I kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier. If you're building a house, you want to make sure the ground you're building on is solid. Data is the same way with your processes. And so if your data is messy on your process, your RPA is going to be messy, just because dealing with messy data is bad. From an RPA perspective, that means structured data. Structured data is something like an Excel spreadsheet. That is easily definable. Number 784 is in column B26. That is a key, easily searchable, easily identifiable from a robot perspective. Something like a Word document is just a pile of words, and so it can be a little messy. PDF documents are another good example of unstructured data. A lot of automation is working with PDF documents and taking the data out of a PDF document and turning it into a structured data that a robot could then deal with. And so a lot of work is taking that unstructured stuff and getting it solid so the robots could work with it. Know what goes in the rooms. This is kind of process understanding. So if you think about a kitchen, what kind of activities do you need to do in a kitchen? It's like, okay, well, I'm going to be cooking, so I'm probably going to need a stove. I'm going to need a place for ingredients, and I'm going to need a place for cold ingredients, and I'm going to need a place for dishes. And so suddenly, you have to have a cupboard, you have to have a, stove, you have to have dishes, you have to have a refrigerator. And so all of those things, when you're doing RPA, it's a blank slate. And so know what pieces you need to add to complete your process is a key thing. And so, like we talked about earlier, really understanding what your process is going to be doing is a really big part of RPA. It takes a team. I've been in far too many places where it's just, okay, well, we have one person that does RPA. And then after a year, they're shocked that they haven't delivered, multiple processes and got a lot of stuff done. It helps to have some BAs. As I've mentioned a lot of times, requirements on this is very important, and really understanding the process is key. And then you have developers who can build it, and the BA goes on to the next process, and so on and so forth. You like to have multiple high volume and labor intensive processes across the company, because again, somebody's going to do this in operations, and then finance is going to hear about it, and HR is going to hear about it. And so you just get more and more people who want to get this and expand with it. It talks about return on investment. Your CFO is like, okay, what's the return on investment of RPA? Well, there's an investment part of that that's key too. So it really, the more resources you can throw at this, the better your results are going to be. Planning for monitoring, making sure it's still on. So again, with a lot of RPA processes, you're taking that work away from a person. And so Is that work completing with no issues? Just making sure that everything is still working, making sure the light's still on. You flip the switch, the light works. Just kind of make sure that that's there. Build it into your process that, okay, when the process completes, it's doing something that a person will see. Oh, okay, I see the robot completed at work. It can be as simple as sending an email. But that's an important part of it. And then it's, mow the yard. So once you build that new house, no other work is needed on that house ever again. No. These processes are going to change. Your business processes are going to change. Your systems are going to change. And so you have to kind of plan for that maintenance. It's part of the deal. Just make sure that, to keep these processes working into the future. And again, it helps to have those conversations with your application owners. Okay, there's a system change. Okay, can I know what that is? So so I know that I can test it on Tuesday before it breaks on Monday. That's kind of an important thing. And here's where I kind of mentioned the advanced capabilities. You'll hear the buzzwords of machine learning and AI and cognitive and those sort of things. A lot of people feel that those are going to be used as additional help, but RPA is going to be the container for them. And so you're going to use AI to read a customer email, but I'm going to extract data out of that, and then that data will be extracted to be run into a process. And so in this analogy, those sort of things are the second and third story. And so you got to make sure the foundation's there and you've got RPA working, and then you can build in those more advanced pieces into your RPA. Finally, I'll kind of touch on the RPA Future. I kind of shared these few links, and I think they'll be shared in the chat. In the future, it's going to be almost expected. I think a lot of new employees that are coming into industry are expecting automation to be there, or if they're not there, they're going to move on. And so it's going to turn into table stakes just to kind of retain the workforce. The other thing I'll mention here is the federal agencies, that government that is so advanced, they actually have really gotten into RPA. Ironically, they did start with the rocket scientists at NASA, but it's really expanding throughout the entire federal government. They have an RPA community that, if you're interested, is kind of an interesting thing. There's a 70-page RPA playbook that the government has created if you want to do some more light reading on RPA. And then the other thing I'll mention here is Microsoft. Like I said, they came into it last year. It's a big question of what they're going to do with it. Right now, it's kind of almost like Excel macros, but where do they take it from there? Microsoft's got a lot of clout and a lot of customers and a lot of money, and so they could do some really amazing things with it if they want to, and that's kind of to be figured out. So with that, I will do a quick process review. We thought about doing a kind of a demo, but so many of these processes involve working with customer data, and so what I can do is I'll show you kind of a quick process review. Can you guys still see my screen?
Sure can.
Awesome. So this is a UiPath tool called Task Capture. It looks a lot like your Microsoft Visio, but what it can do is you can use it to document your process. And so what we're doing in this process is we're dealing with expense reports. And so the first step is we're monitoring monitoring an Outlook email address for these expense report emails. I kind of put over here, one of the things this can do is you can include the click-by-click instructions within this tool. And so this is very beneficial when you're doing development. You can add text boxes and so on and so forth. And then I'll just kind of show these screenshots. It captures a screenshot every step. So I hit on insert, click on insert. It'll capture the typing, and then it'll show that you have edited. So this is the kind of detail you really need from an automation detail. So anyway, we're monitoring an email address for expense reports. If there's a file associated, yes, we're going out to an internal application called Toolkit to download that file. If there's not a file associated, we're adding that expense report email information that's coming in the email, and we're adding that into a different application called Orbit. So right now we've already dealing with 3 different applications. Ask your IT to tie three applications together for you and see A, when they stop laughing, and B, how long it would take them to do that. And then the other thing is we're taking all those files that we have added. So we've extracted the data, we've added that data into internal applications, and then we're taking that file and saving it to a file storage system, something like Perceptive, if you're familiar with that. So we keep that file so we know that file. And then we are filing that email away. So everything went well, we're filing the email away. Balkisa, do you have anything you want to add to this process?
Yeah, a couple of things actually. So first thing regarding this process, this is an illustration. Not only we're integrating 3 different systems, but we have 2 different types of automations working together. When when the robot reads the data, gets it into get the supporting documentation from our portal that our clients and vendors interact with. Now it enters it into Orbit, which is kind of our internal ERP. In parallel, it also kicks off the Perceptive. Perceptive has a workflow that was built to facilitate document transfer. So our expense management team used to move paper invoices. They would get the email from the vendor or the transferee, and they would download those invoices, print them, take them, finish what they have to do, and then take them to the next person to also do their part. So Perceptive Workflow was able to help us automate those, kind of the journey of these invoices and on the desktops rather than the actual desks. So in this case, you have UiPath that's automating the process of data entry, and that also, integrates very well with Perceptive that actually automate the movement of documents internally across the organization.
So
Outlook.
Go ahead.
That again, Tom?
No, go ahead.
Well, no, I was just mentioning the last box there where it files it into the email. So this is the second process we have with email automations. I think there is a big need there.
Yeah. So that's, just the kind of a high level example is, these robots can work with email. They could work in your applications. And again, it's the tying all together that's kind of a key RPA benefit. So I think we've got one more slide. Again, if you have questions, I'll take them now. And also, just to have Trent's beautiful sun-tanned picture up here. He is your boots on the ground in Omaha, and if you have questions or curious about RPA or want more information, there's his information as well. So, any questions?